I bid you welcome. I am a little goblin who likes to do makeup, and today we're going to do a clown look with my own special twist while I regale you with some stories about a clown from my home state whose image was used to help create the visage of Uncle Sam. So let's get into it. In my home state of Pennsylvania, there is a city called Girard, and one might not think much of a quaint little city like that, but in the first weekend of every August, they host a festival, the Dan Rice Festival. It is held in celebration of one of Girard's most famous sons. Dan Rice, born Dan McLean, was more than just a clown. He was a pioneer to the industry, sometimes a politician, and someone who often gave so much to other people, he forgot to take care of himself, and that was, ultimately his downfall and what led him to die penniless after having such a big fortune and fame. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So let's go all the way back to 1823 to New York City for the birth of Dan McLean, where he began his circus legacy as a jockey for his uncle around the time of 16 or 17, as his uncle was the ringmaster for the Howes and Turner Circus at the time. All of this work he has been doing with his uncle was about to pay off because he's about to be gifted a stage all his own. He bought shares, I'm not entirely sure how that works with circuses or back in the day, but he bought shares to a pig show, presenting Lord Byron. He had bought a pig named Sybil, but changed their name to Lord Byron because, well, a performer needs a strong name as it is. Transforming Lord Byron, a pig who could tell time, into the swine of time. Oh my god. It sounds like a weird Twilight Zone episode where they meet Doctor Who or something. It's kind of funny. Dan Rice and the Swine of Time began traveling around with their own act right around 1841, right around the time of Dan's first marriage. You could say Lord Byron was a hell of a wingman. Now, Maggie became Dan's first wife and partner in their performances. They danced, they sang, they did puppet shows, anything to get their name out there. Heck, he was paid a whole $4 a week, and that is a whole lot, I'm sure, for back then. And I did the conversion rate because I'm a nerd and I needed to know. And at the conversion rate, with today's inflation and all this other stuff, he would have been paid $3,700 every week. And I am clearly in the wrong business. Dan continued on his rise, and only 4 years later, in 1844, he began working with another large circus installation, which was the Spalding North American Circus. There we go. I just want it to be a wee bit longer there. And Dan was an instant hit, debuting as a clown the first time there. And he honestly couldn't have had any idea how profound that big red nose was gonna be. As far as clowns went during that time, Dan was a prolific figure. He didn't just perform either to make people laugh. He would do, he would engage in song, he would do monologues that were solemn, he would do Shakespeare, sometimes tastefully, sometimes not so much. He was cited as being someone that would provoke feeling out of the viewer and the audience, someone that would engage them in, thoughtful conversation more than just trying to make them laugh. It was even noted that he would do observational humor to engage with the crowd all the way back then, and I think that that's really cool too. He was an innovator, skyrocketing to the national level with the help of the Spaldings. I almost said Captain Spaulding's. That's a whole different kind of circus. Spalding's North American Circus would travel all the way from the top of the Eastern Shore to like Maine and those areas, all the way down the South and visit with some of those towns, performing the whole way. And I'm sure that that was no small feat, as back then in the 1800s, they only had wagons and horses for travel. A fun little piece of information, too, from this period in Dan's life is that before he made it big, he couldn't really afford a lot of, like, performers or animals or things of that nature. And a lot of people would mock or taunt him, calling him a one-horse show. And it was meant because he's not as popular or as rich as his competitors, he can only afford the one horse. And instead of taking that and being like, oh man, it stinks because I can't afford as much as everybody else, you know. He turned it into, well, I've only got one horse, so come see me in my one-horse show. And he put on a show that wowed those people, and that's one of the things that just helped propel him into stardom, was his charisma, his ability to sell himself, to sing and dance with the horse. And, you know, they put on the most beautiful rendition of Romeo and Juliet. I'm kidding about that last part, but could you imagine? That would do it. So it's taken a few years, but after traveling around, Dan began to winter his circus in 1853. He began to winter it where? In Girard, Pennsylvania, making it not only a permanent stop on his list of places to go when his circus was showing or performing or whatever, but it was also a home for him, his wife, and his children. Unfortunately, though, while living there, him and his first wife were divorced. But don't despair for our boy Dan too much, as pretty much within the next year he was already remarried. And he had remarried Miss Charlotte Rebecca McConnell, who was the daughter of one of the wealthy men who had helped found Girard. And they got married in 1861. Now, our boy Dan Rice was not just a national circus performer, but he was reinventing himself into a gentleman who could fit into the political sphere and be taken seriously. His shows would depict skits and monologues in support of the Democratic Party, and you could say at this point that Dan was living the dream. He owned his own part of a circus, which I forgot to mention earlier, that Sigmund's North American Circus had given him Dan Rice's Circus, and like an extension of their own show, but it was all his circus or whatever. I guess that's how it works, or, you know, however politics and things worked all the way back in the 1800s. But, he had a one-ring circus that was under his own name. He was getting into politics. And heck, the best part is, back in the 1800s, he had a salary of $1,000 a week. Imagine, at the beginning of all this, he was only making $4 a week. Now he's making $1,000, and that rounds out now at like $37,000 a week. And like, man, I need to find me a pig that can tell time. They are pretty smart, so I mean, it probably wouldn't be that hard. But I digress. We're back to Dan. Dang. It still just blows my mind how back then his circus was even putting like Ringling Brothers to shame with how famous and influential he was, which is just crazy. And so at the height of Dan Rice's career, he's the star of his own circuit, the Dan Rice Circus, making money. He's meeting famous figures and getting even some praises from prominent people as well during that time period. Mark Twain wrote about his circus in The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, and it's just really cute to me to imagine that Mark Twain as the older gentleman that he was, but with a really tiny body, just standing and watching this circus, and he's like, profound. I must tell everybody about this. And it's just awesome to think that some guy who probably didn't think that he would ever get anywhere, gone from just $4 in the 1800s to now he's been everywhere, and he's just trying to do good at the same time. And I can say that because right around 1861 to 1865, his focus was taken away from the big top as he went to hide in Girard while the Civil War was being fought. And after it was all over, he didn't choose sides or anything. He actually sent money to both sides. He would send money to the churches of the South that were part of the lifeblood down there, the churches and schools, and up in the north, he would send money to the widows and children of those that had been killed in conflict. And I think that that's a really cool way for him to spend his wealth, is to send it to those most affected by the war, not choosing sides, realizing that everybody lost something there. Just proves that Dan Rice is a real class act. Whoever wrote this isn't as punny as they'd like to think they are. And though Dan was at his peak right now, he was struggling to try and keep hidden his dark secret from the rest of the world. And that dark secret is that Dan was an alcoholic. The cracks in his patriotic Uncle Sam personality started to show as he would miss meetings or not even show up for events or anything like that in general. And that's right, if you've at all seen any of those Uncle Sam, we want you posters, you've probably seen visages of our boy Dan Rice, as his patriotic attitude was used in like creation of these. He was such an inspiration to people all over, not just in the circus circuit or even just like performative arts in general. He was in politics, he was meeting with important people all over, and just the way that he carried himself really inspired people. And in fact, Dan was so popular that all the way back in 1868, he threw his hat in for the presidential election. So he decided to run for president, and even though he had supported the Democrats the entire time, he ran on the Republican side. And he was hoping that his popularity would help push him enough to, you know, get elected and make some big changes, you know. Have a big circus and a canvas big top put in over the White House or something like that. Ooh, that'd be really cool. And unfortunately for him, though, he was unsuccessful in his campaign and he was not elected president. Wah wah. And so for the next 10 years, Dan kind of just trudged on through life, and his love of alcohol kind of took forward. You know, it was top priority over everything else at this point in his life, and he kind of stretched himself thin with the campaign and everything else, all of his money, and in 1881, his wife Rebecca, she divorced him. Oh my God, I've been looking at the spot on my face, wondering why it's there, and I've done nothing to fill it in this whole time. Leave it to me. After the divorce, he never returned to Girard, unfortunately, but that wouldn't stop the people there from loving him, as in 1965, Dan Rice Days Festival was enacted. But that's way ahead of us. We'll go back, but know that there is a festival. You knew there was a festival. continuing to try and reignite the flames that fueled his fame back in the day. He carried on performing until 1885, when he would give his final performance. Unfortunately, he would pass away. No fame, no fortune, nothing to his name. He would pass away all alone in Monmouth, New Jersey, in the year of 1900. I was trying to figure out a good way to say that. In the year of 1900. But yeah, I guess that works. But yeah, unfortunately, he would pass away. His alcoholism would lead him to miss deadlines, miss appointments, and then he started to take in bad health as, you know, alcoholism weighs heavy on your body, as I'm sure being a clown and a performer and everything else did to him. He just couldn't take it anymore. Only he knew that to this day, we still had a Dan Rice festival in little old PA in Girard that he loved so much. I'd like to think that that would make him a little bit happy. But I've got a couple of last minute things to do here before I'm done. I've got some contacts, and I've got this stuff from Maron. It's little like tooth stuff, so I'm going to put some of that on there, and we'll be back with our final look here. This is the final look. Probably a little bit more spooky than Dan Rice would have liked, but who knows? Maybe he's a fan of artistic expression. I really love the way that this one turned out, especially with the teeth. It definitely completes the look. I did use the nicotine stain and the blood stain to get that look, and honestly, I love it. The wig and everything together, I am, as the kids say, serving clown realness. Hopefully you learned a thing or two about clowns, and especially about Dan Rice. Thank you again for sitting and letting me ramble on about random things that just spark my interest. Be sure to subscribe if you want to see more videos like this one. Like, comment, do all the things. But the most important thing, stay well, stay hydrated, stay chaotic.